we can almost induce a feeling of anxiety and panic by changing the way that we breathe.
Of course we can. And if anyone wants to do that, you can start breathing in this very unhealthy way right now. You will stimulate a sympathetic response, and that's easily measured. So I thought this was interesting as well. At UCSF, which is very close to my house, University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Margaret Chesney had worked for decades on National Institutes of Health research, looking into something called continuous partial awareness, also known as email apnea. And what she had found was that when we sit down at our desks in the morning, one estimate says that 80% of office workers do this. We open up our email, got Zoom on, got Twitter on. Oh my God, I have 60 emails. We stop breathing. We just stop breathing, and then we go. So she called it email apnea because we're so distracted and stressed out by what's going on. If you think about when you're extremely, let's say there's a tiger coming around the corner here of my house. What am I going to do? I'm going to be silent, because that is a reflex reaction to be very scared, to be silent so you don't become prey. And once it's on, once the fight is on, I'm going to breathe a ton to get more energy to my body, to feed more energy to my brain and heart and other essential muscles to get me out of that situation or to fight off that thing. But we do the same thing unconsciously at work. Even though there's no tiger around, even though there's nothing threatening us, our sense of threat has become so sensitized that so many of us will stop breathing or start breathing completely dysfunctional. And she's found that if you do this for long enough, it can have some of the same effects on us as sleep apnea. By that, I mean neurological disorders, physical problems, again, spiking blood glucose, adrenaline. And it's just something so few of us are aware of. And I was wearing a pulse ox and all these different measuring what happened. Every morning I put this stuff on and sit down. My breathing would go to hell every single morning. And I realized that, that's probably a reason why around 11:30 I used to get the slight headache, used to feel kind of fatigued. It was still morning time and I wasn't full of energy. And so by just switching your breathing, again, you can allow your body to work so much more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. And I think that term email apnea is brilliant because it just brings it to life for people that, wow, who doesn't check email every day? Who doesn't spend a lot of time on their computers, particularly now more than ever? And I really, I can't stop shaking the feeling. You mentioned the tiger, right, that might be popping around the block in San Francisco, around from where you live, which I hope is not happening. But your body's actually doing what it's meant to do in response to a threat. Your body is meant to become anxious. It's meant to become hypervigilant. Your blood sugar's meant to go up, right? Your blood pressure's meant to go up. All these things are happening to prepare you for danger so that you can escape from that danger. So actually, your body is functioning the way it is designed to function, given the fact that it perceives there to be a threat. So the problem is that we're perceiving the email inbox or the multiple screens open to be a threat. So your body is reacting in the same way. So it's not that there's anything wrong with people, right? I think it's very empowering this. Your body's not broken. Actually, your body's doing what it's meant to do. You just got to give it a different signal. You've got to just teach it, go, hey, you know what? I'm not in danger. There isn't a tiger there. It's just 20 emails, right? So I'm a big fan of talking to patients about transition times. So a transition time, let's say from work to home life, instead of just coming all ramped up from work into then trying to relax with your partner and your children, maybe have a 5-minute transition where you do some breathing or you do some yoga, something just to move you, shift you from one gear to the other gear. And I've been talking to a lot of people, particularly during the pandemic, about Zoom calls. I said, before you eat your lunch, just take a couple of minutes, maybe get outside in the garden if you're lucky to have one, maybe just slow down your breathing, do 2 minutes of nasal breathing, put your body in a different state, and you'll digest your food better. You'll crave different amounts. And I've actually seen, James, I'm not sure if you've come across this. I've not seen any research to support this, but I have seen with some patients in the last few years who thought they were reacting to a certain food. Now, of course, some people do react to certain foods, whether an intolerance or an allergy, but sometimes I realized they were reacting to the way that their body was whilst they were eating. So when they did a couple of minutes, I have a breath called the 3-4-5 breath, which I've been recommending for many years. Again, a similar theme, right? A longer exhale than an inhale. But people who try that 3-4-5 breath for 2 minutes before they have their dinner, sometimes they would say, hey, I'm not actually reacting to that food anymore. So I am saying, well, maybe it's the fact that you're eating in a completely stressed out state. Your body's not able to receive that food. But when you chill out and relax, your body's like, hey, this food is okay.
Absolutely right. Again, it comes down to nature. And I thought you made a really good point there. There's nothing wrong with us feeding more circulation to our skeletal muscles when we get threatened. This is really good. This is what allowed our species to survive in the wild for so long. It's that perceived danger and that perceived threat that is so sensitized right now that people will react to an email the same way that they would have reacted 1,000 years ago to that tiger or to being attacked by a mammoth or whatever. And so, some of this a lot of this is psychological, but the neat thing about breathing is by changing the way in which you breathe, you can actually change how your mind is processing thoughts and feelings and emotions. And we know that because this is a two-way street. So there are signals coming from your brain telling your organs what to do, but there are also signals coming from your organs telling your brain what to do. So another reason why that slower breathing works, you're like, I can actually, not only do I feel better, I can think more clearly. Not a placebo. This is how it works in our bodies. And it's so important to acknowledge this throughout the day. Those transition times, what a wonderful thing to do, especially before a meal, especially if you have gut issues. Take a couple minutes, that's not asking a lot, breathe calmly, relax yourself, and go in and eat. And I think that you'd be amazed by how quickly you will show benefits of digestion. I don't think it's too much of a mystery why in so many cultures there's grace before a meal.
Right.
You sit down, you calmly recite whatever phrase, doesn't matter what religion. You sit there a moment, you be thankful for the food you're about to eat, then you eat it. I think that there is a scientific foundation for how effective that is.
I completely agree. And actually, a few weeks ago, I finished writing my 4th book on weight loss for people who are looking to lose weight. And I've written a section on this exact area, exactly what you say, that actually, I don't think this is by accident. There are many benefits of doing this. And it's reflective of our busy modern culture. We don't have time for this kind of stuff. We've evolved as humans. We don't need all that kind of slow stuff, that gratitude, that grace. But you know what? We're realizing more than ever now, actually, we are. As you say, it's a lost art. It's a lost art.
Just speaking to that, this 5.5 breaths a minute, 5.5 second inhale, exhale, this is nothing new either. This was all adapted, researchers found, from prayers, from Buddhist prayers, from Kundalini yoga prayers, from Catholic prayers. All of them that they looked at locked in to this respiration rate of about 5.5 seconds. And these Italian researchers said, this is probably no coincidence. All these different cultures came to the same conclusion that, wow, we feel so much more connected to ourselves, to the universe, to everything by reciting this prayer. A lot of that had to do, this is what the researchers said, to the respiration rate, to breathing in this certain way to calm your body and make you more receptive to that message.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was chatting to my videographer, Gareth, who's just nipped out at the moment. And I was saying, hey, I'm going to talk to James. I know since you heard my chats with Patrick and Brian, he's changed his life. He's tried the mouth taping at night. He sleeps better. He now runs. He does some light jogging, only nasal breathing, and really feeling the benefits. But he said one thing I wonder if you could ask James about, is he says, when I go upstairs now, if I go up a lot of stairs and I nasal breathe, my recovery is so much quicker than when I mouth breathe. Well, you've already answered that, really. You said that throughout this conversation. You're basically saying your physiology changes. It works more optimally when we breathe through our nose as opposed to our mouth. But there is another kind of real life example. This was minutes before we started the call today. He said, it's just incredible. And you mentioned athletes, and I just wonder if you could briefly, the time that we've got left, I'd love to cover this, and also maybe some of those more super breathing techniques. So if we could just cover athletics and kind of recovery and why people really should make that effort. I think it would be super helpful.
So the key with athletic performance is you want to do more for longer in a state of pure efficiency. And we know that nasal breathing is going to allow you to perform harder with a lower heart rate. You're going to be getting more oxygen more efficiently by breathing less. Again, we know how counterintuitive this is, but the science is very clear on that. And you can see this with professional athletes who have adopted to nasal breathing. Sanya Richards-Ross, the best runner, sprinter for 10 years going. It's fascinating to look at pictures of her in the Olympics. Closed mouth, nasal breathing, all of her competitors beside her, breathing through the mouth. She's in front of the line, winning golds time and time again. And she's just one example of what we've already known for decades. Dr. John Douillard has done tons of science, tons of work in this, looking at cyclists, nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, and looking at their endurance, looking at their performance, and looking at recovery. And it is such a drastic difference between those two. One reason why a lot of people give up is they try nasal breathing. They've been habitually mouth breathing while they're jogging for sometimes decades. They try nasal breathing and they're like, I can't get enough air in there. I'm giving up. But sometimes it can take weeks or even months to truly acclimate this organ here to breathe properly. But once you do, the benefits are huge. And check out the work by Phil Maffetone, Dr. John Douillard, and some of the athletes that have adopted proper nasal breathing. Or most importantly, try it yourself. And you can very clearly see the difference.
I would say to people, because I've literally been experimenting this for maybe 12, 18 months now. When I go for a walk, I'm nasal breathing. No question, I will make sure. I don't think about it now because I know I do it. But initially I had to, consciously think about it. I do, I take the kids for walks. We're all sort of trying to spot if one of us is mouth breathing. So I'm trying to instill it in my kids from a young age that this is important. Actually, I went for a run with my son yesterday. He's like, Daddy, look, that guy's running, he's mouth breathing. That guy's mouth breathing. I'm like, I'm sort of conflicted. Have I started something in him? I'm not sure. But on one level, I like it because I think, okay, as you said before, awareness is key, right? Without awareness, we can't make any change. So first of all, let's be aware of what's happening. Let's not beat ourselves up. Be aware. Then let's go, well, maybe I'll start with a walk. Maybe a 5-minute walk each day, nasal breathing, and see how you go. And for me personally, now I sort of am getting into running. I was going to buy a heart rate monitor. And I thought, you know what? Forget it. I sort of don't want more and more tech in my life. I'm trying to sort of go more minimalist. And I use nasal breathing as my barometer. As soon as I go too fast, where I cannot nasal breathe and I have to open my mouth, that's my trigger to slow down. And I really feel I'm getting more efficient, and it feels really good. And you know what? I'm not stiff the next day or that evening. I recover quickly. Again, I will admit this is a subjective experience, but it backs up the data and the science that you've written about so beautifully in your book.
But exactly. It may be a subjective experience, but it's grounded in real science. If you look at nasal breathing and you look at using that oxygen most efficiently, you are allowing your body to operate in an aerobic state for longer than to go anaerobic and have that lactic acid build up and all of that. And this is very well known, having that balance, again, of CO2 and oxygen. And something that Patrick McEwen told me, which I really liked, he said, never work out harder than you can breathe correctly. So once you've reached that threshold and you're breathing, you're like, I really got to breathe through my mouth, or you're breathing in a dysfunctional way, you have to slow down and work yourself back up. And by slowly working yourself up this way, your performance is just going to shoot through the roof. And we've seen that time and time again. And again, these weren't studies that I was doing. These are studies that have been around for decades, that right now there's this new interest in breathing in athletics. And I have a feeling these people who are going to be adopting these healthy breathing habits are just going to show some incredible improvements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's again, it's just reflective of culture. It's the more now, we're quicker, faster. It's like, I'm going to work out, I want to push it hard. I'm going to be grunting. I'm going to be, I wouldn't, is it a Western thing? I guess it is on some level. I really feel we're at that point now in Western culture where we have to go, look, we do so many things beautifully well, but we're kind of a bit lost on some of these other things, and maybe just slowing down and doing less. When we, in inverted commas, work out or move our bodies, maybe use your nose as the barometer, and then, you'll be working on your efficiency. Maybe you'll run less, but you'll run more efficiently, which actually will lead to you running more just a few months down the line.
Yeah, it still ties. There's nothing wrong with running further and running faster than a competitor, right? That's human nature to want to do that. But if you really want to do that, you have to take control of the systems in your body, and you have to be operating more efficiently. Why waste energy? Like, why not store that energy, then use it to best your competitor? That's what sports performance is all about. And something you mentioned that I thought was interesting is, in so many ways, like what we know about eating now, food. I remember in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, just the only things that were around the house were just like processed food. This was normal: white bread, Velveeta cheese, and everyone seemed to be eating this way. Well, we know that eating that stuff is bad news. I'd be hard pressed to find someone who is going to defend eating highly processed foods. It's bad news. It took us a while to get to this point, right? So it took about maybe 20 years of science to come out. Now we all know it. And I really think breathing is this next thing. So 20 years ago, even nowadays, some people are poo-pooing it, say how we breathe doesn't matter. The science is so clear. And you can go back in history thousands of years again, and they had been studying this for so long. And it really feels like this wave of awareness is really starting to crash right now.
No, I would agree, James. So just for the sort of final stage of this conversation then, we've just to sort of really put it in perspective, we're setting the scene that people are breathing too much, they're breathing too fast. And it's not necessarily how, of course, breathing when you're working out and running, sure, work on it if you want to. But again, if you want to do a sprint, you want to breathe through your mouth to beat an opponent, that's okay. It's what we're talking about is how do you habitually breathe, right? So, because I know there's some confusion. So just to clarify, so what you're saying, I think, and certainly what I would say is practice breathing through your nose. Practice for a few minutes a day, breathing less. Try and go for that 6 or even 8 breaths a minute. See how that feels. Now, if you want to go beyond that, if you want to go into super breathing territory, right? The cool stuff that people get, oh, you know what? I want to do a marathon up Everest like Wim Hof or which again appeals to us culture of doing more, and I want to do all that crazy stuff. There are quite a few different methods, aren't there, where we consciously overbreathe. So you were talking about under breathing. Now I want to talk about, Wim Hof, the breathing technique, or one of his breathing techniques, certainly the one that I've experienced when I saw him speak in LA a few years ago. And I recorded a podcast with him a few weeks back. It's not come out yet. And we actually did it where you actually, for 30 or 40 breaths, you take these big breaths in and out, and then you do a hold. What is that doing? Why should people think about these overbreathing practices? Did you try them as part of your research? Did you look into the research here? And what would you tell people about these practices for those who are interested?
Sure. So the first thing, I just have to second something that you said. I'm talking about mouth breathing as a habit. Some people have written me and said, I noticed I was laughing today and I took a few mouth breaths. And again, I'm like, I thought I had made this very clear in the book. So I've been breathing through my mouth talking to you today, right? And when I swim in the ocean, I'm breathing through my mouth. When I'm laughing, I'm breathing through my mouth. This is perfectly fine and perfectly natural. So a few hundred breaths per day, breathing through the mouth, is fine. If we're taking 25,000, it's about that habit and that chronic breathing. You want to be breathing through your nose as often as you can, but that doesn't mean you should hate yourself for laughing or for breathing through your mouth. So I just want to make that really, really clear for everyone.
Or swimmers, right? Swimmers, like, you know, when you're swimming, you sort of have to take it. You don't have to, but you may gulp in a lot of water unless you breathe in through your mouth. So it can be normal for swimming. It can be fine, you know.
I swim and surf almost every day out here in San Francisco. And I tell you, I'm not breathing through my nose when I'm doing that. It's impossible. There's salt water up there. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
It's chronic, it's habit. So in the book, after like you get that foundation of healthy breathing that everyone can benefit from, I kept hearing about Wim Hof breathing, these intense pranayamas, holotropic breath work, these long breath holds. I said, this is completely counter to what I learned before. We shouldn't, like, apnea is a bad thing. Overbreathing's a bad thing. All of that is true when it's unconscious. But when you consciously do it, when you place yourself into a position in which you tell yourself to follow with this ancient breathing technique, and some of these include mouth breathing, exhaling through the mouth or even inhaling through the mouth, something amazing happens because you're allowing yourself to consciously take control of unconscious functions in your body. So with Wim specifically, what I thought was so interesting is we have this autonomic nervous system that turns us on for sympathetic stress or turns us off and relaxes us, parasympathetic. And we've been told if you pick up a textbook, it's going to say this is autonomic, as in automatic, as in beyond our conscious control. But we can control it through breathing. And when we control our nervous system function, we can take control of our immune system functions as well. And we've seen this, people who have been practicing Wim's version, which he calls it Wim Hof method, but he's very clear that this stuff has been around for at least 1,000 years. He didn't invent anything. He was able to take this thing and distribute it to the masses. And he's done that better than anyone on the planet for breathing awareness. But it's no coincidence that the people who practice this, people with autoimmune diseases, with arthritis, eczema, psoriasis, whatever, they can show a marked decrease in the symptoms of their problems. And sometimes they claim that they're completely healed by adopting these simple breathing habits, because what they're doing is they're breathing in a way that purposely stresses themselves out for a short amount of time so that they could spend the rest of the day relaxing and healing themselves. Again, seems a little counterintuitive. Why would I purposely want to stress myself out if I'm stressed out throughout the rest of the day? The point is to focus that and to regain a balance in your body and in your health. And that's exactly what these more intense over-breathing practices do.
I think what you said there about where this has come from, that nobody knew has invented anything, you know, Wim hasn't. These are all practices that have been there. But you also paid homage to Wim. He's got it out there to the masses in a fantastic way. You've said that, you know, that in the Indus Valley 5,000 years ago, there's writings on this and that. You actually, I think you wrote about that yoga, or the research, the scriptures you saw showed yoga initially was just a breathing practice. I think
that's exactly true.
Is that true?
There were no standing poses. There was no movement. It was focusing, meditating, and breathing. Only in the last 100 years have we developed vinyasa flow. That wasn't around until 100 years ago. And I want to make this very clear to all the yogis out there. I do yoga all the time. Love it. I've seen the benefits. There's science proving the benefits. But this practice, this modern yoga that most of us do, is just that. It's modern. So the first yoga was a practice of breathing and focusing, and then it developed into holding one pose and breathing, opening up this side, inhaling into that lung, opening up the other side. And then about 100 years ago, 110 years ago, those poses were combined into this sort of dance-like movement, which had nothing to do with the early yoga. So it really was all based on breathing and focusing on the breath.
Yeah, amazing. And one of the, I think you quote someone in the book, I can't remember who it was, but someone said to you, there are as many breath practices as there are diets. I've never heard that before. I thought that was incredible because we talk about conscious over breathing, and if we had more time, I would talk about two-mode breathing and holotropic breathing. But you know what? It's all there in your book for people to read about. But that is, who said that phrase? Who was it?
A free diver told me that very early on, which I thought was very surprising. I didn't know that there were different ways of breathing. This was years and years ago. But by adopting those different breathing practices, you can push your body into different states. You can relax yourself on purpose. You can stress yourself out on purpose, which has pronounced benefits to doing that as well. And again, you can find books. There's yoga books with 400 different breathing practices with all of these crazy names. All of that's great, but I wanted to focus on the general concept behind these. There are heavy breathing practices, over breathing. There's breath holding, there's slow breathing, and there's nasal breathing. And you can call it whatever you want. You can practice the Chinese version of that, the Greek version of that, the Indian version of that. Doesn't matter because they're really all doing the same thing. To me, it's no coincidence that Wim Hof method, also known as Tumo, has so many of the same benefits of Sudarshan Kriya, which has been studied in 60 different independent studies to help people with anxiety, depression, autoimmune problems. There's no coincidence that these things are helping people in the same way, because guess what? They have you breathe really intensely and then breathe really slowly. It's almost the exact same practice, just coming in from different directions.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, you mentioned freediving, and I know you wrote a book on that. I haven't read it yet, and I am definitely, it's on right at the top of my list to sort of read when I get some time. But one question I had about freedivers who obviously have masterful control of their breath. Did you notice, was there a theme that, a freediver by definition needs to have a very high level of control over their breath, a high degree of carbon dioxide tolerance, so they can actually go down and actually maintain that, tolerate the buildup of carbon dioxide in their body without having that strong urge to breathe. Given the multiple benefits of improving your breathing, have you heard any stories in free drivers that actually a lot of them had mental health problems or depression or anxiety or autoimmune conditions that got better? Or the flip side is, was it those conditions that actually led them to free driving in the first place? I don't know. It's so interesting for me, that.
Many of them had anxiety issues, sometimes depression issues, sometimes addiction issues. There's a great film that somebody made, a very short film, Jonathan Rempel, about a freediver who had all of those things. And she found freediving because when you freedive, you are it is almost like a forced meditation. You cannot freedive stressed out. You cannot freedive with anxiety. You cannot freedive with a sense of panic. You have to completely give yourself over to the water and connect so deeply in your body. And when you're down there, everything is silent. So you are so connected with your breath and with your brain on such an intimate level. And this reconnects people with themselves when they're up on dry land afterwards. And so some people have found that salvation through freediving, and so much of that is due to breath control. So I've never seen, I've met dozens and dozens of freedivers. That book, Deep, looked at the ocean from the surface to the very bottom of the sea, looking at the human connection. So towards the surface, there was a lot of freediving, but I've never seen one who suffered from anxiety. I've never seen one who panicked, because you just can't do that when you're down deep in the water holding your breath. There hasn't been any studies on this. I think it would be fascinating to look at the physiology of someone before and after training for freediving, look at markers of panic, look at other issues, even blood glucose. and how they react, because free diving is the ultimate art of breathing. You are focused on your breath, connected to your breath the whole time.
It's breath, it's mindfulness, it's meditation, it's everything all in one, right? To be able to do that practice. And one study that we've not had a chance to talk about, which I've underlined heavily in my book, and I'd encourage people to read it in the book, is it's just this idea of fear. And that lady who had that genetic condition without the amygdala, this sort of emotional center, the fear center of the brain, and how basically you can't stress her out. She would get scared of nothing until carbon dioxide went into it. She got a dose of carbon dioxide, and that then stressed her out and scared her. I won't sort of spoil the rest of the story there for people, but what's really incredible for that, and I really want people to get this, is that we think fear and anxiety is always about an external event. Oh, that is happening to us. We forget that it can be biology, it can be physiology. And I know how many people suffer from these sort of conditions, and I really, really want to encourage them that what James has been talking about, read the book, learn about these techniques, and start small, because it can really transform every aspect of your life. James, look, I don't say this often, but that is a phenomenal book. I feel quite lucky, actually. I've got these early copies. They're still very sort of the early unproofed manuscripts. So I feel I've got sort of something quite special here. The podcast is called Feel Better, Live More, because, James, it's pretty obvious, but fundamentally, I've seen time and time again where people feel better in themselves to get more out of their lives. And I think it's pretty clear that you're making the case that if we breathe better, we're going to live more. So I wonder if, I want people to get inspired by this. I want them to get your book, but I want people to take action. I don't want them just to hear it and go, that was interesting, and then get on with their lives. So I always like to leave the podcast with my guests with some sort of practical advice. I know you've covered a lot of it already, but just some sort of, what would you say? If someone's heard this and they're still skeptical, how would you encourage them to get going with a breathwork practice in their daily lives?
I would say go see for yourself, because you're your best judge of this. If you have a blood pressure monitor, and a lot of people do, take your blood pressure before and after a simple breathing practice 6 times a minute. You could start with that. Start small, exactly as you had said, and give it a while. By that, give it a week. So adopt a simple practice. And again, this isn't requiring you to go to a monastery or sit in a dark corner. You can adopt healthy breathing practices anywhere. And we know that there's a solid foundation of science between all of these things. We have seen people absolutely transform by adopting simple breathing habits. This is not a placebo effect. It's absolutely real. And I'm convinced, I've experienced this myself. I've talked to dozens and dozens of people who have also experienced it. I've talked to the leaders in the field who have introduced me to all of their data. And I find that this is an underappreciated and underacknowledged aspect of our health, but that's starting to change, and it couldn't happen sooner, especially right now in the midst of a pandemic. Focusing on your breathing can really have some transformative effects.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I really think you're going to enjoy the one I had with Professor BJ Fogg from Stanford, all about habits. It's right there, so give it a click and let me know what you think.
The feeling of success is what wires in the habit. Emotions create habits. And specifically in Tiny Habits, what we focus on is